At precisely 9:13 a.m., Corey Harrison, the biological son of Rick Harrison, who was once adored across America as the smiling face of porn stars, the popular reality TV show that brought quirky history and family charm into millions of homes, said, "I'm not afraid anymore. He's pure evil. I don't care who's mad." In a matter of hours, Rick Harrison's entire legacy fell apart. Let's examine the hidden details of this story. If this story surprises you, please click like to support the channel and subscribe to receive updates for the next one. A single leaked sentence from a private interview hit the internet like a bullet-through blast. There was no video, no press release, just one raw and filtered line that spread like wildfire across Twitter, CNN, Reddit, and fan forums. As the story progressed, the History Channel removed all references to porn stars from its YouTube videos, deleted its merchandise listings, and left fans staring at their DVD box sets, in shock as though they were holding cursed artifacts. However, what shocked people the most wasn't Rick's life sentence without parole, but rather the ruthless silence followed by an outburst from the son he once proudly referred to as his partner. During Rick's shackled departure from federal court, Corey was nowhere to be seen. He wasn't in the courtroom, outside the courthouse, or at the family, but the truth was much darker. Corey wasn't running. He was grieving not for his father, but for a family that never really existed. On the fifth day, he broke the silence. It wasn't a press conference, it wasn't staged, and the interview was recorded by a single person, an independent documentary filmmaker, who was a longtime friend of Corey's, and someone he trusted with the information. He had disappeared for 5 days, saying nothing, making no statements, and posting on social media. Rumors went wild. Truth, there were no lights, scripts, or edits, just a dark room, a single camera, and a man who had finally run out of ways to remain silent. The footage, which lasted less than an hour, was heartbreaking and jagged. "People only saw the porn shop," Corey said, his hands shaking and his voice cracking. "But when the camera stopped rolling, I saw who he really was." For more than 10 years, Rick Harrison was the face of working-class America, the man in plaid who could evaluate a 19th-century coin. He was the clever street-smart everyman who built an empire from a small porn shop. Now, his charm, laugh, and on-screen warmth were all cast under the long, dark shadow of betrayal and buried secrets. The story was only just getting started, and the truth was colder than anyone could have ever imagined. He wasn't just a reality TV star. He became a household name, a symbol of grit and charm, and a pop culture icon, whose porn shop felt like a slice of honest Americana. However, beneath the meticulously edited episodes and televised father-son banter, Rick carried secrets hidden, not only in off-the-books ledgers and coded documents, but also behind sealed vaults, anonymous warehouses, and temperature-controlled storage units that would make even seasoned federal. The truth was that Rick's empire was the front for something much more sinister. It started with whispers, quiet tips, and discrepancies, the kind of things that are easily overlooked, until one former employee came forward, leading agents to a series of storage units rented under false names and shell corporations. Agents hesitate. Thank you for watching, and remember to like, subscribe, comment, and share your thoughts. Let's return to today's story, where fans witnessed history come to life. Researchers initially believed it might have been a pathology archive, a medical error, or a forgotten collection, until they found the handwritten journals full of frantic sketches, dates, names, and references to concepts like celebrity likeness, preservation ritual memory vessels, and target DNA. The remains were not freshly killed but rather preserved, and cataloged with phrases like subject to Forb and acquisition 1997, non-seal lying in containers, stacked neatly in rows. When agents stormed Rick's estate in Las Vegas, they found a hidden chamber behind a false wall, in his wine cellar lined with glass jars containing bones, teeth, hair, and forensic evidence, later matched to missing persons spanning more than 2 decades. The journals were obsessively paranoid and unsettlingly organized, and these weren't stolen objects. They were lives that had been cataloged, harvested, and used for something that had nothing to do with history and everything to do with control. Rick Harrison, once regarded as the epitome of American charm and expertise, was now the focal point of a nightmare of unfathomable depth. Many clung to the hope that his son Corey, the young man who had shared the screen with him for years, would defend him, but Corey refused. Even old 8mm film, some marked with dates, others with only initials, contained disturbing footage of bound individuals examined, measured, and spoken to by a man whose voice and cadence left little doubt that it was Rick. When asked about the life sentence without parole and maximum security, Corey's response was cold and unflinching. It's not enough. Then, breaking the years-long silence, he talked about nights when Rick came home with dirt on his boots and scratches on his arms, claiming he had been hiking or digging for treasure, but never bringing home any treasure at all. He also named his father evil and described rooms in the pawn shop that he was not permitted to enter. Rick called to say that no one, not even security, could enter the co-owner rooms, and there were late-night visitors who came without names and left without saying anything. For a while, Corey thought that maybe his father was just being paranoid, but after the discovery, he realized that it had been a horror show, hiding in plain sight the entire time. Corey spoke with pain and resolve, without asking for sympathy or framing himself as a victim. "I should have spoken up sooner," he said, removing the shame and silence that had plagued him for 20 years. "Maybe someone would have been saved, maybe some of those victims wouldn't be victims. I can't undo what he did, but I won't stay silent anymore." In the days following the release of that footage, public opinion changed, turning Corey from a silent bystander into a reluctant whistleblower. Victims' families who had previously resented him started to see him as something other than a villain. Remember to like and subscribe after seeing the video. This isn't just the story of Rick Harrison's collapse. It's also the reckoning of Corey Harrison, and a terrifying reminder that the true story begins with the destruction of a legacy, the collapse of a pawn shop built on bones, and a son choosing truth over blood. Let's return to today's story, but the witness who finally broke. Occasionally, the most sinister creatures don't lurk in the shadows. Instead, they perch beside us at the dinner table. Prior to the cuffs controversy, Rick Harrison was the epitome of the American success story to millions of people before the courtroom erupted in screams, and before footage of it all aired across national news, like a waking nightmare. He wasn't born into wealth or privilege. Instead, he began with a small family-run pawn shop in the gritty heart of Las Vegas. With keen intuition, magnetic charm, and an uncanny ability to turn history into treasure, he built it piece by piece into a global brand when Porn Stars debuted. Not only was it a TV show in 2009, but it was also a cultural event. Viewers watched a working-class family turn grit into gold, while laughing, learning, and feeling like they were a part of the transaction. Rick, with his receding hairline and gruff delivery, became the shop's soul. He was fair but stern, smart but relatable, the guy who could barter over a Pez dispenser 1 minute and explain the value of a Revolutionary War sword the next. People trusted him because he didn't try to be anything he wasn't, or so it appeared behind the scenes. As the show's popularity grew, so did Rick's goals. He made real estate investments, started other businesses, and discreetly curated a private collection of artifacts that rivaled some small museums. Production insiders observed how obsessed he became with maintaining his public persona. Every line, joke, and episode cut had to pass through him. He wasn't just talented, he was the architect. And for a while, the illusion worked, turning the porn shop into a pilgrimage. Rick Harrison, known to fans as Big Haas, had always occupied an awkward space between loyalty and quiet. But beneath the carefully crafted image, something much darker was always brewing. Sight merchandise flooded the market, and Rick's face appeared on everything from bobbleheads to coffee mugs. Tourists traveled from all over the world, and teachers brought students to meet the man who made history entertaining. Off-screen the pressure, he was the brash and occasionally uncooperative son, learning the business under his father's careful eye. When the lights were on, he was Rick Harrison. When they were off, he was someone else entirely that someone else didn't appear overnight. Corey would later disclose in an interview, adding to the weight of fame, legacy, and the nagging realization that something about Rick never quite felt right. Rick had always been extremely private, according to former employees and longtime associates. His office was off-limits. Financial records were kept by hand rather than digitally, and staff members were discouraged from questioning certain purchases, particularly those involving artifacts with dubious origins. One former employee claimed that certain boxes you never opened, and certain transactions were never logged. You just knew, don't ask. Despite this, the world saw Rick as a business hero, and he spoke at schools and even lobbied in Washington, without anyone suspecting anything. According to FBI files, Rick allegedly started holding invitation-only events at remote locations throughout Nevada in the years before his arrest. These events reportedly had no cameras, no records, and only a select group of wealthy people, many of whom were from overseas. It was at these events that the true horror surfaced. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment with your thoughts. Let's return to today's story. A new type of artifact started to appear: fossilized human remains. Investigators now believe that many of these were fakes made to entice obsessed collectors. But some weren't, some were real, and some even now remain completely unexplained. They paid millions for relics that weren't real. Some were real and came from real people. Tissues claimed to be body parts connected to celebrities, or historical figures were labeled with terrifying titles, like the Napoleonic origin Marilyn DNA fragment, or the unverified Kennedy series. In hindsight, the porn shop was the ideal front, because it allowed Rick to access a steady stream of desperate sellers of rare items, legal gray areas, and the kind of plausible deniability that gave everything legitimacy. It also made him a celebrity, someone so visible that history seemed to have twisted into something far more disturbing. According to a forensic psychologist who spoke during his post-sentencing hearing, Corey Harrison's early years on Porn Stars were full of ambition and a desire to prove himself to the public and his father. There was fire in his eyes and a hunger to be taken seriously, in order to carry on the legacy. But in between the smiles and the staged banter, there were brief flickering shadows when doubt crept into his face. "When I was younger, I didn't question anything," he said. Trust was so deeply ingrained in mainstream culture that no one, not even his son, could comprehend the horror that existed behind those doors. Later, Corey said, "I thought he knew what he was doing. I thought he was building a future for us, and who wouldn't want to believe that? He was my dad." But when Corey was refused access to some business files, cracks started to appear. Then, one night, he discovered a locked briefcase in Rick's SUV, which contained black and white photos of skeletal remains, arranged like museum exhibits, along with handwritten notes in Rick's distinctive script. That night, however, was a turning point. But Corey remained silent. "I was afraid, but he didn't confront Rick, call the police, or notify anyone. He said that I wasn't sure if I was misinterpreting something. Want to be incorrect. But I also didn't want to be correct. So he stayed." He smiled for the cameras without saying anything, and the brand proceeded on tour. But the shadow of that briefcase never left him. Corey didn't realize the entire extent of the darkness he had been standing next to for so long until years later, when federal officials raided Rick's properties. Rick Harrison's story was not just about a businessman becoming famous. It was about the meticulous creation of a myth. He created a world centered around family fame and a fascination with the past, and used it as a smokescreen for something monstrous. Corey didn't cry when the judge handed down a life sentence without parole. Instead, he sat motionless, hands clasped, lips tight, and stared at the man who had given him everything and taken more than he could ever explain. When the mask has been removed, we are compelled to wonder, how deep did the rock go? And how long did we choose to ignore the smell just to keep watching the show? It's like thinking that every dusty object in a pawn shop hid a mystery waiting to be disclosed. But the true secret was Rick Harrison himself. The moment of reckoning for Corey didn't occur during the raids, the trial, or even when the gavel fell and gave his father a life sentence in prison. Rather, it arrived in quiet when the burden of knowledge became too much. Rick met him halfway up the steps, stared at him for a few silent seconds, and said, "You're going to want to turn around, son. There is a lot to carry. So thank you for watching the movie. Don't forget to like, follow, comment, and share your thoughts." Let's return to today's narrative. Nothing was more revealing than the one room Corey saw only once, the shops in a sanctum with no cameras and no staff. By morning, that guard had been moved to Corey's parking lot duty. The signs had always been there, subtle at first, then harder to ignore moments that didn't sit right. Like watching Rick snap when a collector unintentionally opened a private drawer in his office and was denied access to archival ledgers that Rick kept locked behind a two-way mirror. It wasn't dusty or disorganized, like Corey had anticipated. Instead, it was pristine, cold clinical glass shelves lined the walls filled with sealed containers, some labeled with barcodes, others with cryptic handwritten notes and dates. And in the middle, a stainless steel table sat beneath surgical lights. Rick took him there on his 25th birthday, as if it were some twisted rite of passage, and the door required both a physical key and a custom-installed digital thumbprint scanner. "What is this?" Corey asked. Rick smiled, closed the door behind them, and said, "This is where history waits." He never explained that the moment would haunt Corey for years. Thank you for watching the video. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment with your thoughts. Let's return to today's story. He attempted to explain it by saying that perhaps it was a secure appraisal room, that the lights were for delicate inspections, or that the jars held ancient artifacts. But as the FBI dug deeper into Rick's operation, they discovered that he had kept a secondary inventory of items that were never entered into the shop's public system, never recorded on the show, and never intended for anyone else to see. These ghost items were recorded in a separate logbook that was discovered in Rick's personal storage locker after his arrest. The smell, which persisted on his clothes long after he left, was not of rot, but rather of sterilization bleach alcohol chemicals. Didn't have any paperwork, but the dates matched unsolved disappearances and cold cases involving people who disappeared days before Rick received mysterious deliveries. One FBI agent described it as a multi-lead system designed to collect, contain, and quietly monetize human remnants under the false premise of historical preservation. What's more disturbing is the discovery that it was a preserved segment shipment from Cairo that read like medical records from Morrow 1992 and dental artifact SE at 12.17. The gold and silver pawn shop, which was once a quirky shrine to American capitalism, had become a vault for the macabre, a marketplace where the dead were stripped of their names and turned into cataloged commodities. Some of these items had been sold to collectors and buyers who thought they were buying legitimate scientific curiosities, only to discover later that they were in possession of human remains. DNA testing connected several of these items to missing persons from at least 3 different states. Many recalled signing unusually strict NDAs, documents that went far beyond standard confidentiality, including language about national security interests and non-disclosure of archaeological materials. At the time, they assumed it was legal. Following the scandal, one former clerical employee described a culture based on fear and silence, because you just didn't ask. And everyone knew there were things you didn't touch, subjects you didn't bring up. If you stayed quiet, you got paid. If not, you were gone. Thank you for watching the video, and please remember to like, subscribe, and comment with your thoughts. Let's return to today's story. A local historian reportedly approached Rick with concerns about an artifact she believed had been looted from a Middle Eastern burial site. Within weeks, she lost her university funding, and her name was removed from academic publications. They now suspect it was part of a much larger cover-up. There is even evidence that suggests Rick used his fame to discredit anyone who came too close in 2016. The most damning piece of evidence wasn't a document or a sealed container. Rather, it was a video recovered from a private residence. A complaint alleging academic fraud was anonymously submitted to her department, and the letter's metadata linked it to an IP address directly connected to Rick Harrison's office. This was only one piece of a much larger and more unsettling puzzle. Every time someone approached the truth, Rick pulled the strings, erasing anyone who dared to question the illusion. The grainy security footage from December 18, 2013, shows Rick escorting 2 unidentified people, with faces blurred into the restricted backroom, while carrying a wrapped object about the size of a human torso. The recording abruptly ends less than 10 minutes later, and when it resumes, the people are gone, and Rick is by himself carefully wiping the stainless steel table with a cloth soaked in a dark, unidentifiable liquid. The biometric vault beneath the pawn shop was one that required both a code and Rick's fingerprint to open. The implications of this footage, which is currently undergoing forensic review, are frighteningly obvious, even without confirmation. The pawn shop was never just a pawn shop. Rather, it was a stage front with a carefully designed trap door hiding something unspeakable. Corey would later claim that as soon as he entered the inner chamber of the shop, the one with surgical lights and jarred specimens, something inside of him shut down, and that part of the FBI's Criminal Investigative Division's special agent, Marissa Kent, a veteran of cartel cases and international war crimes, was not easily shaken, but even she acknowledged that nothing had prepared her for the anonymous tip that came in one night. He never really returned, and he had no idea what his father was doing, but he knew it had nothing to do with antiques and definitely nothing to do with honoring history. It was about power, ownership, and control over life and death, sold and repackaged as collectible curiosities. The caller, who would not identify himself, said he was a courier for Rick Harrison's private shipping network. He described unmarked crates, cash payments, and late-night deliveries to climate-controlled storage units in an unremarkable industrial park outside of Las Vegas. Then, he said 5 words that made Ken's arm stand up. "There are bodies in the crates." At first, it sounded like the rants of a disgruntled former employee, but the man knew specific delivery slip code storage. He claimed to have accidentally opened a crate and discovered what appeared to be a mummified human torso, sealed in a glass case, with metal handles labeled and tagged, using a system that did not match any known commercial or government format. The following morning, the FBI filed for a sealed emergency warrant, and within 48 hours, a multi-agency task force arrived at the scene. What they discovered would rock federal law enforcement to its foundation. The investigators cited unit serial numbers and even partial inventories. LLC led back to a P.O. box in Reno and an abandoned office suite with no workers, no paperwork, and no legitimate business activity. Thank you for watching the video, and please remember to like, subscribe, and comment with your thoughts. Let's return to today's story. Inside each unit was a labyrinth of metal shelving, locked containers, and sealed industrial freezers. The first unit alone contained human remains that had been carefully arranged, not thrown away, but rather vacuum-sealed, plastic-sealed, and labeled. For example, some containers had chilling labels: Kennedy Strand No. 3, Egyptian crossbred specimen. Unverified Roman relic notes that referenced global sites, specific dates, and instructions, like client notified and keep in cold storage. At first glance, the codes such as RH47, V21, MO3 meant nothing, but investigators would quickly realize they were part of a sophisticated cataloging system Rick had developed that indicated not only acquisition dates and locations, but even estimated historical value. The clean, clinical, and meticulously organized space looked like a museum, but that illusion was destroyed when hundreds of photos, Polaroids, negatives, and digital prints of staged images of the remains were found. Some of the victims were posing on antique furniture, while others were surrounded by artifacts from various eras, including World War II medals, Renaissance goblets, and Prohibition signs. Several of the photos seemed to show surgical procedures in progress, indicating that the bodies had been altered after death. One particularly unsettling image showed one depicted a fully articulated skeleton, sitting on a replica Louis XIV throne covered in crushed velvet, while another displayed the body of an infant in a jar marked Acquisition Southeast Asia gift from a client. These weren't just human remains, they were trophies, a hideous scene made for an audience that might not have existed. Or, worse, one that had paid a high price to see them. Let's examine the story's hidden details. If this story surprises you, don't forget to share the video with your friends. Like to subscribe and support the channel in order to be informed of the story's upcoming developments.